Ladies and gentlemen, first, thank you very much for braving all the evacuation routes north and making it here tonight. It's my genuine pleasure and distinct privilege to introduce this evening's speaker, who has also generously agreed to take questions and answers. There will be written Q&A cards, and please fill those out, and we will then take as many questions as time will permit. I must say at the outset that Secretary Baker is absolutely heartbroken that he can't be here tonight. He is doing something very important that we persuaded him to do, which is to lead a commission of reviewing the LBJ school at UT, in which they have all sorts of meetings going on, and that he could not be here. And His Royal Highness and the Secretary spoke, and you know, they're both Princetonians. And so Prince Faisal's reaction was a very quick one. He said, "Don't worry, Jim, you won't be there. It'll be a perfect opportunity for me to take over the Institute." So we're giving you this opportunity to take over the Institute, Your Royal Highness. His Royal Highness's subject, Saudi Arabia and the international oil market, could not be more timely. The dramatic rise in oil prices over the last several years has placed international oil markets in the American public spotlight once again. And the unease with the vulnerability of our energy sector has only intensified in the wake of supply disruptions caused by Hurricane Katrina and the yet unknown effect of Hurricane Rita. The subject of energy supply and security is a contentious, even emotional one, as we well know, especially here in Houston. The factors that are driving today's oil markets are very complex. They include rising Asian and U.S. demand, political uncertainty in the Persian Gulf, I must say the Arab Gulf, and OPEC production policy. The role of Saudi Arabia in oil markets, long a dominant one, has also come under closer scrutiny. Both Riyadh and Washington remain firmly committed to the Saudi-U.S. special relationship, which is historic and long. At the same time, rising energy prices have led to a renewed focus on the ability of national oil companies, such as Saudi Aramco, to generate the huge amount of investment, several $1 trillion over the next 20 years, that will be necessary to meet growing global demand for oil. I would like to note that the Baker Institute, our energy forum, has recently embarked on an ambitious 2-year research program on the role of national oil companies in international energy markets, and our first keynote speaker was the head of Saudi Aramco. It is hard to imagine a speaker better qualified to address the broad range of issues associated with Saudi Arabia's strategic role in the international oil markets. His Royal Highness has served as Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for 30 years, a tenure that reflects both his extraordinary competence as a diplomat and the immense confidence placed in him by his government. Prior to assuming the foreign affairs portfolio, our speaker held a series of senior positions in the Ministry of Petroleum and Petromin. To this day, he is a member of the Kingdom's High Council of Petroleum. In short, there is no one who can speak with more authority on the geopolitics of oil markets and the Saudi-U.S. special relationship than this evening's guest. From my own decades of service in the United States Foreign Service, I can give personal testimony to the high esteem in which our speakers held in Washington and in capitals throughout the world. I remember firsthand the key role he played with then President George Herbert Walker Bush and Secretary of State James A. Baker III during the first Gulf War, and most importantly, during our very close consultations leading up to the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991, which to this day remains the principled framework for a comprehensive Arab-Israeli peace settlement on all fronts. Prince Saud Al Faisal has been a compelling voice for moderation in the Middle East and a staunch supporter of close cooperation between Riyadh and Washington. In sum, our speaker is one of the most respected figures in the Arab and Muslim worlds. It is an extraordinary honor to have him with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Royal Highness Prince Saud Al Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, Your Royal Highness.
Well, I never dreamed I'd have this effect on Houston. Everybody's leaving town. But ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey my heartfelt condolences to the people of the United States for the suffering, death, and destruction brought about by Hurricane Katrina. At the same time, allow me to praise the great city of Houston for the noble generosity of its people in offering a very needed assistance in sheltering those who suffered most. Houston has always been a great city, and I'm very glad to be here with you today. Many years ago, when I started my government career in the Ministry of Petroleum, one of your own Houstonians gave me advice about traveling in the oil-producing countries of the world. He was what is known in the oil industry as an old redneck. We were sitting in my office in Riyadh on a very hot summer day. When is there not a very hot summer day in Riyadh? When he volunteered this unsolicited advice. When you get to one of them countries, he said, the first thing you do is to go to the nearest shop, buy some durable candy, stock up on candles, go to your hotel room, fill the bathtub with water, and wait for the revolution. I'm sure I don't need to do that in this oil city. I hope. But before I proceed further, I must apologize to my colleague and friend, His Excellency Mr. Naimi, for delving in his subject. He has my wholehearted blessing in discussing matters relating to foreign policy anytime that he so wishes. My topic today is of vital importance to both my country and yours, namely the structural flaw in the oil industry. The severe increases in oil prices which we have experienced over the past several years is only a phase of a cumulative process that has been going on for some time. The developments in the oil industry are important and warrant our full attention. High energy costs can create long-term repercussions to the economies of the world that will affect all of us, consumers as well as producers, both in the industrialized and the emerging economies of the world. It is important, therefore, that our two countries, the largest consumer and the largest producer, make the time available to assess the situation. We must define the issues and review our options to resolve them before they become too severe to manage. This becomes a matter of urgency and priority for all of us, especially when Saudi bashing has become fashionable and allocating blame has become an end in itself. Crude oil has doubled in prices to over $65 per barrel since 2002. escalating LNG prices have already had some indication of depressing effect on the global economy. The risks are too great to leave the solution to market forces. Because of global interdependence, depressions create social and political instability which cannot be confined to one region of the world. If not dealt with promptly and reasonably, such instability will spread regardless of the political and economic soundness of any individual nation. What then is going on in the oil industry? There are three sets of variables that need to be examined: production, consumption, and political psychological variables. On the crude supply side, there is currently no shortage of oil. But however, and for the first time in decades, there is no sizable excess production capacity. This has understandably caused some heated debates about the long-term supply of oil. Some pessimists, mostly geologists, contrary to their customary nature, are predicting dire shortages in the future, while some optimists, mainly economists, also contrary to their nature, are predicting higher prices would eventually reduce the growth rate of consumption while increasing the growth rate of production. However, all these predictions are at best educated guesses based on uncertain assumptions. What is indisputable is the finite, depletable nature of oil. However, global proven oil reserve had increased from 550 billion barrels in 1970 to 1.2 trillion today. And there is no reason why this trend should not continue. In addressing these uncertainties, I must emphasize Saudi Arabia's proven record of meeting its production commitments, irrespective of international crises and political turmoil, or even wars. Yes, we have kept our commitments even when wars were being fought in our region, when oil tankers were being set ablaze in the Gulf, and when our cities and oil facilities were being attacked by Scud missiles. Saudi Arabia made up for shortfalls in oil production levels by maintaining between 1.5 and 2 million barrels per day of excess capacity at great cost to our industry and economy for the last 20 years. Saudi Arabia's year-to-date production in 2005 has increased by 700,000 barrels per day from last year. This accounted for more than half of the increase in the global demand for the period. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has declared its plan to increase its production capacity by 2.4 million barrels per day by the year 2009. This represents a net capacity increment of 1.5 million barrels per day, while the rest will augment existing capacity. Barring any outside impediments that are beyond our control, we see no problem in achieving this ambitious target. We have signed drilling contracts, selected project management teams, allocated funds and put the initial engineering plans on the drawing boards. And unless the international companies use up the equipment we have on order and divert contractors from our oil fields to other projects, we see no problem in achieving our objectives. It is estimated that the total investment needed to increase OPEC production to meet demand by the year 2025 ranges between $258 and $382 billion. The difference of $124 billion is due to different estimates in demand projections based on different economic growth assumptions. This gives you an idea of the difficulty of planning investments by producing countries. Yet, with the attitude of damned if you do and damned if you don't, we are now, in spite of what we have done and are doing, accused of all things of a lack of transparency. This truly puzzles me. How can we lack transparency when we have published our production capacity, our oil and gas reserves, and the current and future production plan? And we have done so in a manner totally consistent with international norms and standards. In fact, our known practice is to err on the side of underestimating our reserve and potential production. Let us face it, additional data will not stop endless questions and challenges raised by those who get publicity and consulting fees for questioning everything we do. No amount of data and analysis can convince a truly dedicated conspiracy theorist. The focus on tarnishing proven Saudi performance is largely a distraction from the fact that the key price and supply issues affecting you are not about volumes of production, but rather about gasoline formulations, limited refinery capacities, lack of storage capacity, and the various other restrictions that have paralyzed the energy industry in the Western Hemisphere. Without minimizing the importance of the environment issues, a balance must be reached between the need for further oil exploration and development and the preservation of the environment. In that respect, Saudi Arabia calls for increased research in this field. We are ready to join others in developing uniform regulations that are environmentally responsive and sustainable while offering the most effective energy utilization. In fact, the real energy issue that we need to address today have little to do with Saudi Arabia. Consider the situation with regard to some of the major oil companies. In recent years, we have witnessed unprecedented mergers and acquisitions on both sides of the Atlantic. Tremendous resources and capabilities have been concentrated within the hands of a few corporations. All of them have resources and experience to invest in and manage the entire value chain of the oil industry. The collective expectations were that oil and gas industry would experience a tremendous revival as a result of such restructuring and integration. But this did not materialize. It seems that over-regulation made it easy to avoid investing in needed downstream operations. which are of marginal return, by tempting investors to seek higher return and safer investments. The result was a break in the value chain of investments in the industry. At the risk of angering some of my friends in the audience, oil companies may have forgotten that calculated risk-taking is the means to higher profit-making. They may have opted for the ease of the cautious advice of corporate accountants instead of the spirit of adventure that had characterized the oil industry from its inception. A critical shortfall in the industry's refining sector has been created, which is totally beyond the control of oil exporters. This in turn has led to a gap between the oil production of crude oil and consumption of refined products. The consumers are clamoring for more fuels, which cannot be supplied due to the lack of refining capacity. This gap traditionally has been bridged by the integrated operations of the oil companies. To be fair to the oil companies, the main reason for the refinery shortages is the environmental and land use restrictions that limit the construction of domestic refineries. Refinery projects which already require years to construct have to wait for additional years for site approvals, if such approvals are forthcoming at all. In fact, notwithstanding certain modifications and expansions in existing facilities, not a single refinery was built in the United States during the last 3 decades. According to the Energy Information Administration, global refining capacities have only increased by 1.3 million barrels per day over the past 5 years. Meanwhile, oil demand has increased by over 7 million barrels per day. Today, global refinery capacities stand at 82.7 million barrels per day, over 1 million barrels short of global demand. Yet, in spite of these refinery bottlenecks, Saudi Arabia is called upon to increase its oil production on a daily basis. Clearly, additional oil production will do little to meet the fuel requirements of the world refined products. We, however, began adding to our refinery capacity in Yanbu and Jubail, our 2 industrial cities, which are the major hubs of our petrochemical and refinery industry. And there is room for more expansion. Today, I heard that we are opening or in the process of establishing 2 refineries with a capacity of 800,000 barrels per day in Saudi Arabia. We therefore invite all investors to join with us to build additional refineries and to expand existing ones, to alleviate the refined products bottlenecks. This invitation does not require any delays in implementation that would create added costs to the consumers. All it needs is the will to contribute to relieve the pressure that is building. At the same time, we are ready to join any efforts in building facilities in the US. Over-regulation does much to limit supply and raise prices. Gasoline specifications often vary on a state-by-state basis. Applying standardization would increase the efficiency in managing refineries and allow better utilization of fuel product storage capacities. The imposition of boutique fuel specifications on a state-by-state and country-by-country basis only confounds efforts to formulate global solutions for overall fuel shortages. The reality is that as oil supplies from the North Sea, Alaska, and continental USA lag behind demand, heavier crudes with higher sulfur content will be increasingly needed to meet increased demand. Therefore, fuel specifications must be standardized in order to modify refinery processes on a timely basis. This is something which we must resolve urgently if we are to ensure fuel specification and optimum refinery efficiencies over the next decade. The question of stability in the Middle East is a major concern. Conflicts in the region that contain over 65% of the world's oil reserve and 45% of its gas reserve have been allowed to spiral out of control. Regional turmoil, military confrontations have created a volatile atmosphere that undermines investments in the region's oil industry. This volatility has in turn become a fertile ground for oil price speculation. Every tragic incident in the Middle East has become a green light for oil traders to set higher premiums on oil supplies. The need to putting a just and equitable end to the Arab-Israeli conflict is a matter of extreme urgency. This would not only end decades of human suffering, but in the process rid us from the unhealthy speculation that have been damaging to the oil markets. I have taken a lot of time to cover these matters because they are of vital importance and yet have no simple resolution. Identifying the problem is always easier than seeking their effective solution. What is certain, however, is that we need to move away from the blame game and to recognize the simple truth that the desired solutions can only be arrived at through collective cooperation. Facing these challenges requires a joint effort by oil producers, oil consumers, and the oil companies. To institutionalize a fruitful dialogue among all concerned, King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz, the custodian of the two holy mosques, took the initiative in setting up a secretariat for the International Energy Forum in Riyadh. One of its primary functions has been to facilitate data exchange and transparency through the administration of the Joint Data Initiative, which involves monthly submission from producing and consuming countries. A few months ago, while in Dallas, he called for the convening of a conference under the auspices of this international forum. We look forward to increased cooperative effort and stand ready to work with the United States to do our part in addressing these challenges. Let me conclude by quoting an old Chinese proverb. It is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. Thank you for having me here, and may God's peace be upon you.
Thank you very much, Royal Highness. We have many questions. I think you've answered in your remarks many questions based upon what will make oil prices come down: extra refining capacity, extra production capacity, fuel standardization, and I believe that you've addressed these issues, unless there's something more you want to say on that. But I think your remarks basically addressed all three. One question is, can you comment on Saudi plans to monetize its natural gas reserves? Will it be done indirectly by enhancing oil recovery or directly through LNG or GTL?
Well, I was in the Ministry of Petroleum, but I can't say that I am an expert at oil and gas issues. I don't want to hedge the question, but the strategy of Saudi Arabia and its development of its gas resources is to use these gas resources. There are two kinds of gas resources. One is the associated gas, and that has a special use. But the natural gas that we find is not going to be used for export, but for industrialization inside Saudi Arabia. This is a difference between us and some of the Gulf countries of the region.
In general, where do you see the balance between government-led and private sector-led investment in the downstream sector?
In the downstream, we are willing, as I said, to invest. Aramco is willing to build refineries. We have a refinery here that, by the way, is helping in the recovery effort for Louisiana. And this is one of the advantages of being in the United States. So we are willing to invest in downstream operations in the country, as well as building refineries in Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, this is a necessity. The private sector in Saudi Arabia is also beginning to enter into the field of downstream investments, and there are some companies that are pretty substantial now, and that have the resources and manpower and financial to enter as partners with either Saudi government projects or foreign government projects. And with our entry into the WTO, of course, we will follow the rules of the WTO, and therefore investors in Saudi Arabia will be able to own their refinery completely, and to own land and so forth and so on.
Has Saudi Arabia considered the means to diversify its economy in the eventuality that oil is displaced by substitutes in the long term?
Well, I may have a different opinion than the general opinion in my country. I don't see what's wrong with basing your economy on oil to want to diversify. What better resource can we find to base our industrial development on than oil? And diversification, I don't know how to find a resource that we can diversify that is more than the oil that Saudi Arabia owns. So it is true, it is not good to depend on one resource. But if you have oil as that one resource, you're not in a bad position.
You are in Houston, Your Royal Highness, and this question always comes up because one of our citizens here, Matt Simmons, has written about Saudi Arabia's reserves. So we have several questions here. Just one of them is that, would you comment on the conclusions of Matt Simmons on the quantity of Saudi Arabian oil reserves?
Comment on the quantity?
Of Saudi oil reserves, given commentaries like those of Matt Simmons that say those reserves may be more limited.
Well, they've been announced. How much is the reserve, Yusuf, and some of the latest? $261 billion barrels. That's not bad.
That's not bad. The tanks are not empty. On foreign policy issues, Your Royal Highness, there are quite a few questions on Iraq. Could you comment on the recent events in Basra? How concerned are you about the sectarian strife that seems to be emerging in Iraq between Sunnis and Shia, and about Iran's influence in Iraq?
Well, yesterday I made some comments on that in New York, and I was taken to task by everybody. What I told them. I hope I won't be taken to task here for what I'm going to say, but I'm going to repeat what I said there. Unfortunately, Iraq has every sign of moving toward disintegration. The Kurds had always had a special relationship to the majority of the Arabs that make up the population of Iraq. So that is no problem whether they get a separate entity in the north of Iraq. But the real danger is in the division that is being projected between the Arabs of Iraq, dividing them into Shias and Sunnis, and establishing a separate entity for both. If this happens, that means Iraq will be divided into at least three portions. This is the right recipe for bringing the countries around Iraq into conflict themselves. We have Iran on one side, who will come and side with the Shias. We have the Turks on the other side, who will come on to fight with the Kurds. And the Arabs definitely will be dragged into the fight on the part of the Sunnis. The road to take is to get the Arabs together, the Sunnis and the Shiites, in order to maintain the Arabic character of the state, which has been there for thousands of years, not just hundreds of years. Iraq is one of the oldest countries of the region. It's 8,000 years old. It is not a new country that can be played with or toyed with. And the danger that exists now is that the enemy is presumably now the Sunni Arabs. That they are the ones who are fighting the resistance fight, and they have become the enemy. The South has been stabilized to a great extent by the presence of the British and the American troops. And the Constitution has given the right to the governors of Iraq to have independent constitution and almost self-rule. So with the quiet and the peace that has been established in the South, the Iranians have moved into all these governments with money, with people, and even with religious scholars, and are setting themselves in these governments, mind you, under the protection of the military forces of the United States and Britain. Several years ago, we fought a war with the United States and Saudi Arabia in order to save Iraq from the occupation of Iran. Now it seems that Iran is being handed over Iraq on a golden platter. So this is something that the United States must think about. Unless the Sunnis and the Shiites are brought together in a majority government to hold the country together, it will disintegrate into several parts. And then the whole region will also disintegrate, and conflicts that we have not dreamt of in the past will be facing the international community. And that is something that nobody wishes to have.
That is a very sobering analysis. Going to an equally difficult issue in the region, the Arab-Israeli conflict and the prospects for peace in the wake of the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. What is your assessment of the next steps, and will Saudi Arabia continue to play its role in toward a comprehensive peace that we struck at Madrid?
Well, at least we have a move from Mr. Sharon for withdrawal that is in the right direction. But withdrawing from Gaza alone, if it is the end of his movement towards peace, will be a meaningless gesture. Gaza, in any case, is the most populated piece of land in the whole world. The number of per capita people per square mile is the highest in the whole world. So giving it up is no great sacrifice on the part of Mr. Sharon. But in any case, it is a positive sign. It allows the national authority for the Palestinians to exercise its role as a government in a Palestinian territory. But he has to follow that with other steps. I don't know whether Mr. Sharon, with his history, and he's now, how old is he now? 75. Whether at this late age he can turn into a peacemaker is something that he has to prove. But before him, Mr. Rabin, who also had what he called an iron-fisted policy towards the Palestinians, turned into a peacemaker. And he was killed for it. So miracles do happen, even in Israel. And if this miracle happens to Mr. Sharon and he becomes a peacemaker, then he has a certain road to travel. He has the roadmap, which is there and which he can pursue. And he has also the proposal by King Fahd, by King Abdullah, the peace proposal that was accepted in the Arab League unanimously for establishing normal relations with Israel immediately with all the Arab countries. The Arabs have made no secret of what they propose or where the maximum and minimum compromises that they are willing to make are. And it is time for the Israelis to put their cards on the table. If there is a proper response for the for the roadmap and for the peace proposal established by the Arab countries, and Mr. Sharon is willing to move to negotiate in those areas, then there is a prospect for peace. Everybody knows what the peace should be. I was quoting an Israeli author, Amos Oz, who said, and I don't remember exactly the words, that everybody knows what the peace is going to be like. Every Israeli on the street knows what kind of peace will be possible with the Palestinians. Every Palestinian knows it. It will be somewhere along the 67 borders of the war of 67, the border of the war of the 67, with some adjustments to what has happened since 1967, the reality of the situation. Villages have been built here and there. Some adjustments have to be made, but generally that is the line that is going to be the peace line between Israel and the Arab world. And so the war, the continuation of the conflict seems a stupid thing to continue, a silly thing. It generates hate, it kills people, innocent people. We have seen on the television screen Israeli youth being plucked out of their homes and driven out after years of struggling to build their homes in the Palestinian territories. And we saw the shock on the faces of the Palestinians themselves in seeing the Israelis being taken this way by the Israeli army. These youth have been manipulated by their government as pawns in the negotiations by telling them they can build settlements in the Palestinian territory, only to be negotiated away. So they are the real victims, the Israeli youth and the Palestinian youth. The people must make their voices heard. King Abdullah, when he made his proposal, he spoke directly to the Israeli people, because they are the people that must make the peace. I was using the simile that Clemenceau used, and I said, peace is too important to leave for the politicians. The people must make the peace. They are the ones who are suffering. They are the ones who are dying. The Middle East is no longer a place where you can play games with the lives of people or use them as pawns in a negotiating process. You must come to terms with the issue of peace. You must come to terms with the lives of people and allow them to live with each other. Nobody can live in an area in spite of the people of the area. Israelis cannot live in the Arab world in spite of the Arabs. They have to live with them. And we have to live with the Israelis. And we are ready. And I hope that the Israeli government is ready to move as quickly as we are willing to move.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, and thank you very much for being with us tonight. I think